Well, Larry, there's no question about it that 2020 and COVID-19 marked um, us entering into a new era. And we've heard a lot about new normal and the next normal and so on and so forth. But what we've actually experienced over the last year and a half is a culture shift. And I think when people talk about normal or next normal or new normal, what they're really speaking about is culture. And culture is something we don't think about. It's like breathing. Culture is how we do things and how things get done. And so I think moving forward, Larry, we have an opportunity to do things differently and not return to normal, but hopefully create a new standard, one that is better than the one before, and hopefully helps us all aspire to be better people, have better families, better communities, better business, better country, a better world.
I am Lawrence Payne, a proud graduate of the University of St. Thomas, class of 1972. Please join us each week for a wonderful program here at Mac Studios from our campus, entitled For Such a Time as This. Each week we examine with our guests the social, economic, spiritual, and emotional issues that we face as human beings. Our discussions are rooted in unconditional love. We look at the 2 feet of Catholic social teaching, charity, and justice. Please join us here from Mac Studio for Such a Time as This. Welcome to this segment of our wonderful For Such a Time as This, brought to you from the wonderful campus of the University of St. Thomas. I have today as my guest a very special person, a good friend who is a thought leader and author in our city, and who has written a couple of books. I'll mention the first one, but I'm really going to dive into the second one doing this show with him this afternoon. He has a book previously out called Leadership, The View from Here, which he'll just touch on briefly. It really is a classic leadership book as to understanding what leaders are, what they should think, how they should do, how they should operate, how they should see themselves, and how they should exercise their leadership. But the one that I want to talk about today is the recent book that just came out, very recently came out this week. And I am so excited about it. I've read it 3 times now. I'm working on my 4th one. It is a big book. It is 11 by 14. I guess they call those coffee table books. But the size of the book is not the issue, even though it catches your attention and gets you to really want to pick it up and look at it. It's what's in the book. The title of the book is Beyond Words, an intersection of philosophy, inspiration, and poetry. The author is Russell Richard, who wrote it during his time in quarantine during the pandemic year of 2020. It is the most thoughtful book. It is a mosaic of thoughts and perspectives about subjects and emotions born out of the human experience and had a chance to reflect on during the pandemic. After a year of 2020 gripped by uncertainty and wonderment by all of us, Russell took the time to examine what was going on around us during that year. Our common humanity, the fabric of society, stress, the daily news cycles of all the wonderful, crazy, I'm using those words intentionally, wonderful, crazy things that kept happening during the crises. The global pandemic, the racial injustice, the inequalities, the public health disparities, unemployment, homeless, wildfires, hurricanes, flooding, on and on and on. How do we navigate this uncertain future coming out of 2020? What gives us hope for our future? What gives us life renewed? What are those common humanity experiences and moments to consider ideas together, to expand our point of views? All of these are important issues and themes covered in the book. But let me tell you very quickly before I bring on Russell and we have a conversation about the book, what the book is not about. It is a voyage into the world of thoughts. It is not a critique of beliefs, but an opportunity to pause and to think and to consider new ideas and rethink what you believe and why you believe it. It is a great book in your aid to personal growth and fulfillment. Russell, welcome to such a time as this.
Larry, thank you so much. It's great to see you, and I appreciate that remarkable introduction. Thank you so much.
Well, it is a book now that I have to admit I've read, like I said, a couple of times. Now I'm on my 3rd one. Actually, I think it's my 4th one.
Okay.
Every time I read it, I find new things.
Okay.
And what it has caused me to do, and I'll share this with you on air because I haven't had a chance to share it with you personally, it has made me rethink what I came out of the 2020 pandemic with as to what I want to do next.
Well, Larry, thank you so much for sharing that. My heart is warmed by the fact that you have taken a liking to the book. My hope was that the readers would read it multiple times because I think it's a useful tool, a personal tool, maybe even therapeutic during times of personal reflection and introspection. This book, Larry, was a passion project of mine. It is my personal reflection of the year 2020, expressed in philosophical and inspirational and poetic terms. As you know, and we've spoken about this before, 2020 was replete with events that captured our imagination and our attention. And as you noted earlier, we were force-fed a daily diet of crisis. And it was difficult for us to see and hear those things and not think deeply about humanity and what we want to be moving forward. And so my hopes was that I was able to capture some of the emotions and some of the ideas that I felt during 2020 and share them in writing with the world.
It reminded me more and more of The Dark Night of the Soul, where the book causes you to look at your personal development. When a person undergoes a difficult and significant transition, which we all went through during 2020, the previous frameworks like identity, relationship, career, habits, or even our belief system that previously gave us life and meaning prior to the pandemic may no longer apply.
Yeah.
And so it is a great time to take the book and use it as this reflection point to begin to look at how we see ourselves as human beings individually and collectively going forward.
Sure. I couldn't agree more. You and I had a conversation last year, I think right around May or June, and I commented to you that this pandemic, as tragic as it was a comma and not a period. Right. And what I meant by that was that we would get through it, and we would get through it together, and hopefully we'd come out on the other side better. Whatever that meant for you as an individual, as a family, as a community, as a company, as a government, as a society. But I also thought it was the time for us to pause and have an introspective moment and examine our priorities and our assumptions and rethink what's most important and what's most important to our families, what's most important to our businesses, what's important to us as a community. I think moving forward, community is a word that continues to ring in the back of my mind because we're all part of the same human family. And I think this global pandemic reminded us of that. And I'm hoping that some of the writings in this book will inspire people to think about that and other things in a more deep way.
Well, the book, as we all know, comes at a time not only after the pandemic, but in the middle of a country and a nation who is trying to figure out even what democracy really means and how to have a democracy that's inclusive for everyone and the same for everyone. So in this in-between time, the book really lends itself to some themes. The 21 themes that are in the book lend themselves to the current themes of reality that are happening in society. This is a very uncertain time period. We are in, I call this the in-between time between the old world that is dying and the new one that is struggling to be born.
Sure.
And in this in-between time, it is a perfect time for deliberation, for thought, for dialogue, for conversations, for critical conversations. But the book's themes lend themselves so well to this moment in time and this moment in history. Speak to that for a little bit for me.
Well, Larry, there's no question about it that 2020 and COVID-19 marked us entering into a new era. And we've heard a lot about new normal and the next normal and so on and so forth. But what we've actually experienced over the last year and a half is a culture shift. And I think when people talk about normal or next normal or new normal. What they're really speaking about is culture. And culture is something we don't think about. It's like breathing. Culture is how we do things and how things get done. And so I think moving forward, Larry, we have an opportunity to do things differently and not return to normal, but hopefully create a new standard, one that is better than the one before, and hopefully helps us all aspire to be better people, have better families, better communities, better business, better country, a better world.
Well, along that theme of a cultural shift, it seems to me that this whole discussion of inequality, inequities, and where we are is a moment to talk about we are not in a relational culture. We are not in a culture of noticing and acknowledgement of truth and reconciliation, of needing and wanting to be held accountable. So in this constantly growing divide and in-between time, the book speaks to the reality of those 21 themes as a way for us to seek some kind of common understanding and be effective change makers in what is a shifting landscape and a shifting platform on all our feeds, on all our feet on a daily basis.
Sure.
So our footing is not as solid as we would like we would like to think that it is, and it probably will not be again in this foreseeable near future until we work through some of these common issues.
Right. No, I agree with you. I think a couple essays in the book speak directly to what you're saying. In fact, I think in chapter 2, I talked a little bit about leadership and what that looks like to me, or what that means to me, smart, effective leadership. And I think that is perhaps a guide, a benchmark, perhaps that people could look to. Leadership moving forward is paramount to our success, and to the extent that we get the leadership piece right, we can dream and hope and aspire to a better future. But leadership is critical. And so goes leadership. So goes our city, our country, the world. If we fail at leadership, Larry, we do so at our own peril. I talk about things like, forward and what that looks like, coming together with the collective wisdom of the world to develop, a community and a world with limitless opportunities for future generations. We're just passing through, you and I, but there's a generation or two behind us. And what we leave for them, what they inherit is so important. And I'm hopeful that we can, through the next year or so, be our best selves and create a future for them that they're proud of.
Well, on that theme of the second chapter, leadership, I think you're right. The point that I think derived from that chapter leadership is that leaders make the impossible possible. Mm-hmm. And so that leadership is a cornerstone, as you mentioned, along with 2 or 3 other themes that you mentioned are so important to this moving the needle forward in a common collective future of a majority-minority shift and all the other shifts that are taking place. Speak to a couple more of the themes that you think particularly resonate with us at this time.
Well, one theme that resonates with me is Inequality Speaks. And I think one of the things that we experienced in 2020 was a heightened awareness of inequality and injustice. And I think we, as a community, as a country, refocused and took to heart some of the images that we saw on display on our televisions throughout 2020. And so I think equality moving forward is critical. Leadership moving forward is critical. Vision moving forward is critical. And to the extent that we can address those things, as you mentioned earlier, will determine how robust a future we'll have.
Well, let's go back to my favorite theme and chapter that you mentioned, Inequality Speaks. One of the things that came out of that is this quote, "At the advice of wisdom," which we're very short on wisdom, "at the advice of wisdom, I held my tongue." So the challenge, I think, today, because we all have held our tongue. In some cases, I feel like I've bitten off the end of my tongue, holding my tongue. Yes. But now is the time to speak.
Sure.
And now as it ever was to rise up with whatever one wants to call it, righteous indignation, holy guilt, whatever it's going to take, but
Yeah.
to be very forceful in your voice being heard around the issues of our day that are impacting negatively on so many of our fellow human beings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I agree, Larry. I couldn't agree more with you. I think our experience in 2020 really caused us all to pause and to really think about what's right and what's good for us individually, what's good for us as a community. And I think we have to hold on to that, because too often we have a moment where we pause and we think about those things, and then we return to the way things were before. My hope is that we don't. My hope is that we hang on to those experiences and allow them to remind us what we could slip back to if we're not careful. And so my hope is that as we move forward through COVID-19, because we're still in this pandemic. Let's not forget that COVID-19 is still alive and well. We have not eradicated. But my hope is that we will. And then on the other side of it, we will be better as individuals and better as a community.
Well, you hit it so well of what we could slip back into. And I think in some ways slip back even worse than we were before. I mean, what's happening now all around this country, it's really almost this uncertain period between the times of even one could say a stable government, where anything might happen, anything is possible. More civil unrest. Some are even predicting a civil war, the rise of militia groups, the power vacuums that is trying to be filled, the secession wars, who's going to be in power, violence, poverty. All those things lead to an instability that, as you speak in your wonderful poetry throughout the 21 themes, leads us to have to figure out more and more, what am I going to do? As the individual citizen, as the individual human being, in all the morass that we see around us, all the things that we see, what am I personally called to do and be? What's my purpose? But the word I want to get to is what is so clear to me in so many of those 21 themes. What's going to be my legacy?
Yeah.
The theme of legacy comes up so many times in your work.
I like that. You know, you were referring to what are we going to do, and it reminds me of the essay on the future. And so often we think about the future as something in the distance, something over the horizon. And the point that I tried to make in that essay is that the future is now. What are we going to do now? And, you know, you refer also to legacy. Man, I tell you, I think that we are at an inflection point with a very important question that we all must answer. And that is, how will we all be remembered?
Yeah.
How will we leave this place? And what type of legacy will we leave our descendants?
You know, and since life is just a series of stories along the journey, the real question is, what stories are we telling ourselves about ourselves? What stories are we telling others about ourselves? And are those stories the same? And what I'm realizing is that discrepancy, that void between the word and the deed, between what is said and what is done, between what is preached and what is practiced, is becoming the chasm is becoming so wide that it's going to be very difficult to navigate those waters, particularly when we keep talking, as you and I do offline so often, about the need for people to start thinking creatively about upstream solutions rather than spending our time, energy, and money on downstream reactionary things.
Sure.
And to me, again, in the chapters of the themes of the book, it doesn't say this in this way that I'm about to use it, but it says it in many other ways. It's the difference between being involved in something and being a participatory person in creating or co-creating that future. Right now, we're just kind of actors in the play. We're not the writers, we're not the producers, we're not the creativity end of it. We just follow the script, we get on the stage, and we recite our words.
Sure.
It seems to me we're going to have to get more deeply involved as a true participant and a true co-creator of what we want that future to be.
Sure. Well, you know, Larry, I write for philosophy, I write for inspiration, and I write for poetry. And all of those are intended to get people to think more deeply about whatever that subject might be. And so my hope is, as people read Beyond Words, an intersection of philosophy, inspiration, and poetry, is they think deeply and more deeply about some of these things and really question where they are, what they believe, and why they believe it. It's an opportunity to pause and be reflective, be introspective, and be honest with ourselves. I think you also touched on another interesting piece. You, I think, alluded to truth and knowledge, and there's a chapter in the book, Knowledge Speaks. You know, there's so many voices that we have to listen to, Larry, on a day-to-day basis, but not all of it is truth. And so we have to question a lot of the things that we hear, and we have to do our own research, and we have to draw our own conclusions and get to a point where, you know, we can take truth forward. Because what we've been dealt, I think, in times past, hasn't always served us well.
Well, now you done gone from preaching to meddling, as all people would say about the preacher. The question is about truth. What is truth? Can we handle the truth? Do we want to know the truth? And so what you see now is this pushback against the truth, this critical race theory debate that is going on. It's just trying to elevate and accentuate and put out there what the truth is for the denial that we've been trying to live in this false narrative and this false sense of history. Because the impact of chattel slavery today, the loss of land, culture, freedom, language, and family is just as real today as it was back then. So
Sure.
when I hear you talking about these things, it's so important because part of the chapters, it kind of woven in there as I read between the lines, is the sense of loss. To be a true change maker demands the right and power to feel our losses rather than trying to escape from them, to learn from them, as you said about information and knowledge. Information that we take in education, education we turn to knowledge, knowledge into wisdom, wisdom into action, and do something with it.
Sure.
But that's not the way human beings react. That's not the way we're wired. It takes intentionality and mindfulness to do what we're talking about. It
Sure.
takes real commitment of meditation, reflection. I might even add prayer to be able to get to that place where you understand this world around you from the perspective of a human being and not an I and a me, but to get to a we and us.
Well, I'll take it even a little further. I think it also takes courage because in many instances, Larry, the truth is unbelievable. And it's easy to stick with the narrative that we've been given for so many years and for so long. And sometimes the truth challenges that narrative and unravels things that we've believed for a very long time. And, you know, that's not an easy pill to swallow. But if you want to talk truth, then, you know, you got to take those things head on.
Yeah. I mean, the whole idea around truth to power is courage, right? To be able to speak truth to power takes immense courage. And I think it takes humility, it takes gratitude also. I think those are the two words that I see more and more played out every day. I think is the combination of that. I think it's a combination of courage, humility, and understanding your gratitude of what you've been given, or grateful for what you've been given, that allows you, demands you, calls you, urges you to have to speak and do that in a way. So let me ask this as we kind of come to an interesting close very quickly, because it went by very fast here.
It really did.
Today. Let me just ask, is there anything particular we haven't touched on? What kind of is the thing that resonates with you the most in the book going forward? And your hopes now that you've put it out there for this audience that you see, what do you hope that the reader, the participant, the devotee, the person who dives in deeply to this, what do you hope they get out of this and do?
Well, Larry, I think you just said it maybe about 3 or 4, maybe even 5 times you said the word hope. I hope that people don't lose hope. Throughout 2020, we were at a time where we needed hope, and we still need hope. Some of the things that we're dealing with are intractable challenges. We won't get through them easily. We won't get through them quickly. And hope is the reminder that better is possible. Hope is a sequence of events that activates change. So we can't lose hope.
Well, I'll sum up this way, and I think you're absolutely right. I'll build off of your closing comments. The book, your book, Beyond Words, allows the reader to do what one should do with any new work of poetry or any new work of authorship that one is exposed to around many different themes. It is about change. And ultimately, the themes, the word that keeps coming back to me is change. Change is the heartbeat of an individual's growth. Change is the heartbeat of a people, a nation, a city, a state, democracy itself. There will be loss on both sides. Loss is simply an element of change. Clinging to how things were instead of imagining what they could be is not the way to go forward, because therefore there will be no forward if we do not accept the changes.
Sure.
Gratitude, hope, all those words we talked about. I call it pandemic joy. I want to get now out of the pandemic and get to the things that we have in common more than we disagree on.
Sure.
Commonly shared strategic vision.
Sure.
But I think what you and I both talk about so often is how to bring and build a movement that breeds with what we must have, because it's not optional. This new thing that's waiting to be born is like breathing in life itself. To breed is not an optional thing. So to create this new life going forward, this collective understanding of human beings is not optional. And so it seems to me that the politics that we are debating should be more about a true debate. The best ideas as we debate them about how our democracy and changing demographics affect each other, and working through our fear. Fear works, but it is not a healthy way to have democracy. And if you have one side that is truly locked into the old paradigm of I'm not going to change because we've always done it this way, and the people who have done it this way benefit the most, white privilege is not something people are trying to take away from anyone. We're just saying throughout this nation, in this country, we want to have the same rights and privileges that go with white privilege for everyone. So it's not a sense of loss or taking away. It's a sense of expanding and being inclusive and holistic of all human beings on the face of the earth. The intersection of philosophy, inspiration, and poetry allows one that opportunity to be a reflective human being and to think through these themes and these subject matters with intentionality and mindfulness to figure out their role and place in this changing society. Not something to be fearful of, just something to work through to find your proper role, place, and purpose so that you can build your legacy for yourself, for your family, for your grandkids, for your great-grandkids, and into the generations that remember. Remember, I'll end on this note, that history has always been about understanding the sacrifices and struggles of our heroes and sheroes, about the walking, talking now generations. There's also about the world we're creating for those yet waiting to be born. And when one takes that long view of history, my little passage on the face of this earth, during my time to serve my fellow human beings, becomes something that I have to think about in the long term, not the short term, not the immediate problems and issues, the long term. I want to thank you, Russell, for, first of all, being a friend. I want to thank you for writing this book. I want to thank you for, the kind of dialogue and thoughtfulness it's going to create. I think it lends itself to an ongoing small group discussion of people sitting around in a circle and figuring out, okay, what are we going to do, people? And how we're going to help support each other in what we decide to do. So I'm sure we'll be talking more in the future. Again, congratulations on the book coming out, and we'll continue.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. This has been fun, and I look forward to those small venues where we can intellectualize more.
Yeah, because I think we have to get back out and things have to be face-to-face. Relationships have to be continue to be built, nurtured, and maintained. That's an eyeball, face-to-face kind of operation, developing mutual trust and respect in the process so we can make these changes and be understanding about how important these changes are. All right, before Darnell tells me I have to go bye-bye, let me just say it's been good being with everyone. Thank you for being part of this segment of Such a Time as This, brought to you from the wonderful campus of the University of St. Thomas. As always, until we come together again, be well, stay safe, peace, power, and love.